Hello everybody and welcome to tonight's episode of Beginner Breakdown. My name is Alex Moellering and I'm glad to be your instructor this evening. And tonight I got a fun theme planned for you. Tonight we're going to be talking about pins. So the name of this lesson is The Pin is Mightier Than the Sword. Keep that in mind, it's going to serve us really well. But before we start, just an intro. So what is a pin? It's a very common strategy. Some people might have heard of it, maybe you know what it is, but we're just going to go over some real basic idea here. So a pin is a kind of tactic in chess. And in chess, I like to differentiate between tactics and strategies. Strategies are more long-term positional plans, and tactics are more quick, short-term ideas that are going to get us an advantage. So a pin is a tactic. It's going to be a quicker idea that's just immediately going to get us some kind of advantage. And it happens when one piece attacks a second, and if that piece, the piece that's being attacked, if it moves, then a third piece behind is the one that's attacked. So we have just a simple intro to a game here. And in this position, we have the move bishop to b5 that is played. And this is an absolute pin. There's two kinds. An absolute pin is one where the piece that is pinned is stuck to the king, right? So in this position, if the knight were to try and move anywhere, then white would take the king. It would be an illegal move because you can't move into check. So an absolute pin means this piece absolutely just cannot move and the knight is pinned to the king by the bishop. Bishop to g4, on the other hand, is another kind of pin. This is a relative pin. So in this case, our knight can move. If I click on Lichess, it's got some options for us. But the problem would be, if I were to move this knight, then the queen hangs. So I lose my queen. So relative pin means the piece, it shouldn't move, right? Because I don't want to lose that valuable piece. So again, the basic idea of a pin is you have one piece that's attacking in a straight line, and it is keeping a piece stuck because you don't want to lose the piece that's more important behind it. Okay, so now that we know what a pin is, let's talk about three major principles of a pinned piece. The first one, and I like a lot of alliteration. So the first one, pinned pieces are petrified. They cannot move, or at least they shouldn't move. So in this case, we have d4, knight to f6, bishop g5. This is a Trompowski. And Cooley29, glad to have you in. What's up? e6, knight to c3. This is just a possible opening example. Bishop to b4. So now we have two pins in the position. Somebody tell me, what kind of pin is this? Our bishop on g5 pinning the knight. Relative pin, right? It's not the king, but it's a very important piece. So this knight can move, but probably shouldn't. This one, on the other hand, is, what's it called? Absolute, right? The bishop on b4 pinning the knight to the king. It actually can't move. It's illegal. So we have our two kinds of pins. e4 castles. And in this position, white to move and play a really good move. We're going to play e5. And our pawn attacks the knight. And the knight is petrified. It's pinned. It can't move away. As much as this knight would love to run and hide, if it does so, we're going to take the queen. So the best that black can play for is a counterattack. They might try h6 with the idea that if we take, they're going to take us. In this particular position, white's actually much better because bishop h4, g5 looks good, but it doesn't work. It looks like the pin is stopped, but we can take. And if queen takes f6, then our bishop survives. But if you take the bishop, it's actually checkmate in two moves. Anybody want to take a gander and try and get checkmate in two moves from this position with white to move? So, queen where?
Queen to g4.
Queen g4. Yeah, this is check. The king has two legal moves, h7 or h8, and regardless of where the king goes, or follow-up.
Queen to g7.
Queen to g7, defended by the pawn. This is checkmate. So that's just one case where we can see that this pin, right, was never addressed. And we were ready to attack. This knight is petrified, and because black didn't acknowledge the threat, we were able to get an advantage here. All right, here's another example of a possible opening game. This is a little more complex, but it's really, really fun, so I wanted to at least show it off. So this is called the Budapest Gambit, where black is playing e5 and giving up this pawn with the idea that we're going to try and get it back and get white to mess themselves up. So pawn takes pawn, knight to g4, we're attacking, hoping to get the pawn back. Bishop to f4 defending. So we bring out our second knight, attack it twice, right? Knight to f3. And we can't attack it one more time. We can play queen to e7. But we're going to play bishop to b4 check first, because if queen to e7 first, we're trapping our bishop. We want to keep our pieces able to get developed, right? If it's just sitting on the back line, it's not going to be helpful to us. Bishop to b4, and there's two moves here. Again, the stress isn't super important, but some people don't want to play knight to c3 because they're afraid of doubling these pawns. This is actually okay for white, so it's not a big deal. But because of that, some people will play knight to d2. This move is also okay, but notice we've created an absolute pin. So we have one in the position already. The knight can't move. We should be aware of that. Queen to e7. And now this piece is attacked 3 times, and there's not any way for white to save it. So a common idea is to play a3 and say, okay, I can't defend this knight or this pawn, but I can force you to make another move. I can make you move away, and then maybe I'll get something good. Hello, Shachopa. Glad to have you in. But in this position, there's actually a fun trap. The move to play here is to take this pawn and sacrifice the bishop. And here's the idea. If pawn takes, then white, because of a pin, has checkmate in one move. In this position, I know it's wild. Knight's on c6 here.
D3.
Knight to d3, yeah. And this is a smothered checkmate where, because this queen now is pinning the pawn to the king, this is an absolute pin. And the king is fully trapped, so this knight is delivering the killing blow. Really, really brutal. It's a fun one to get in a game, and the point isn't necessarily to have prepared that, but it's a good example of showing that, yeah, this pawn is totally petrified, cannot move. Even though it costs white the game, if white were to try and take the knight, then we would take the king anyway. So, pins, really, really valuable. They can give you a big advantage. We have a second principle here. So our first principle, pinned pieces are petrified, can't move. Second one is pinned pieces don't protect. Right? Normally, a chess piece exerts some influence on the board. So in this case, this knight to f3 is actually influencing, I'll put a knight out here, all of these squares. It might not be a good idea for it to go to those squares, right? In this case, if it were to go to d4, we would take it. But it's at least putting some pressure on there, and it's defending, so that if maybe white wants to play d4, it's supported. So keeping in mind what your pieces are aiming at, where they're actually attacking and defending, is very helpful. But when a piece is pinned, it doesn't get to do that. So this is just one, again, opening example. And in this position, bishop to b4 is played, pinning the knight to the king. And white actually played a bad move here. They made the mistake of playing bishop to c4, which normally is a great move, developing our knight, preparing to castle, and attacking a key f7 square. But white's made a mistake because they didn't acknowledge the power of this pin. So does anyone see what move black should play in this position? There's two good moves, but both of them work on the same kind of principle.
Knight to e4. Knight takes e4.
Yes, knight takes e4. And the idea is the knight's not actually defending that pawn, right? Normally, this knight would just capture us, but because of the pin, it's petrified, and so it doesn't protect. The alternative move is you can also just take the knight first and then do this. It works out kind of the same, but I actually like taking the pawn first, because even though we double these pawns, our third principle, which we're going to get to in a second, is we want to pressure the pinned piece. We're going to put pressure on the pinned piece, or pile up on them. Because when a piece can't move, adding extra attackers is usually going to be to our advantage, right? It can't escape, which is one of the natural things to deal with an attacked piece. Okay, but let's look at another quick example here for pinned pieces don't protect. So in this game, e4, e5, we have Scotch gambits. And again, knowing the openings isn't necessarily important, but in this position, white has actually chosen to sacrifice 2 pawns. This is an opening that I play all the time. It's probably my favorite opening. But white sacrifices, instead of recapturing on d4, they develop a bishop. And then instead of defending their pawn, they allow knight takes e4. So white has given up 2 pawns, but white plans to win them back with some clever pins. So in this position, the move to play is rook to e1, pinning the knight to the king, and hoping to, just win this piece. You took 2 of my pawns, but if I win a piece, that's great. Now, black has a move here that is looks really, really strong and looks almost undefeatable. Does anyone see, what might you play if you had the black pieces to defend your knight and maybe cause some more mayhem? d5 looks really good. We're defending the knight and we're attacking our bishop, so not only have you solved the problem, but you're adding a tempo, you're making me do something with this bishop, and you're going to get an extra move. But white can actually exploit this a little bit and retain a slight advantage, or at least be not worse. And surprisingly, I'll give you some chances to take a look at some future ones, but the really cool move you can play here is bishop takes d5. And you say, okay, well, I'm just going to take with the queen, right? Why would you sacrifice that piece? But now, if you take a look, this knight is pinned. This pawn is pinned, because if the pawn were to move out of the way, I would take your queen. So we can play knight to c3. Neither of these pieces can take our knight. And we're attacking the queen and the knight together. So this is actually a fork that works because of 2 pins. It's amazing. What are you going to do? You're just going to have to move your queen away, and wherever you move it, I'm just going to take my knight back. And I'm going to win this pawn back pretty easily. If you try and defend this pawn, I don't even know how you would. Maybe something with the queen, but if you try something silly like this, then I'm going to win your queen. Double check. So I'm going to win the pawns back, and it's a fine position for white. So I just wanted to show this one off. It's one of my favorite pins. It's really cool. This is in the Scotch Gambit. It's called the Anderson attack, and it relies on this really nice double pin idea. Okay, so pin pieces don't protect, right? Neither of these pieces are defending this square. Our third rule, as I mentioned earlier, is we want to pile on or pressure the pinned piece. So in this example, hopefully you can see the pretty obvious move here. Knight to d5, right? We want to put pressure on this piece. In this position, it's kind of a weird imbalance where white has 4 pawns versus 2, both sides have a knight, and white has a bishop and a rook versus a queen. So it's a really weird imbalance. Hard to say who's better. It's going to be kind of awkward to play either way. But if we were to just take this piece and end the pin, then we haven't gained anything. It's just an even trade. But if we play knight to d5, we're able to exploit the fact that this knight can't move. If the queen were anywhere else, the knight could just back off, and it'd still be a weird, imbalanced game. But since the queen is here and the knight's pinned, nothing can really stop it. You can defend the knight, sure, but are you really going to trade your queen for my 2 pieces? I just have a rook and 2 extra pawns. So you're probably not going to do that. You're probably going to move just away, get out of the pin somewhere, and I'll take your piece. And now I have a rook and 2 pieces for this queen, plus some extra pawns. It's still going to be weird, but I feel happy playing this as white. So we want to put pressure on the pinned pieces. In this position, it's white to move. Does anyone see a good move you would play if you had white in this position? Yeah, pawn to e5. With the really simple idea, again, the knight can't move. It's petrified. So if we were just to take it with the bishop a move earlier, we wouldn't have gained anything. But if we put pressure on it, it's going to give us a nice advantage. Let's look at one final example here. We want to pressure the pinned piece. And this is actually from a grandmaster game that took place last year, so 2021, between 2 grandmasters, or at least, actually, no, I think they're both FIDE masters, but they're like over 2,000. Very strong players. And one of them just made a really massive miscalculation that involved a pin. So this affects every level of play. The game was a Pierce defense, e4, d6, d4, knight f6. Donkey Boy, I don't like the bird opening because you're playing f4 very early and you're exposing your king to danger. Bishop to g5, bishop to g7, queen to d2. And black's idea is they're going to get a really fortified defensive setup. Their king is going to be safe. White's idea is they're going to use their queen and bishop to put pressure over on the king's side, maybe launch some pawns. So that's kind of the general idea of this opening. But here's where it gets interesting, is black plays a massive blunder in this position. Typical moves here you might see are castling or h6. Both are fairly typical. Maybe you might see c5. But in this position, black plays the move e5. And this is a break, a pawn break, right? Fighting in the center that is normally a good idea. It's fine to do this, but it's a little too early because black is a little too exposed, hasn't really castled, and there's actually a really big problem. Does anyone want to take a second and look at this position, see if they have any guesses for how white should gain an advantage? And I will just give you a heads up. If you don't mind, that's okay. Amazingly, the computer says this position is like about even, 0-0. After e5, this is +8. So white is up almost a queen after this move because it's that bad. It looks fine, but there's a big problem, and it all has to do with this pin. So see if you can figure out how to make an advantageous position for white here. It's a little harder, but any suggestions I'm happy to take. I'm sorry?
Is it pawn across D, D4, pawn across?
So you want this pawn to take on e5? Well, yeah, no, it's fine to take a look at some ideas.
I like he takes e5, maybe bishop to b5.
Okay, so d takes e5, and maybe we're exposing the king a little with bishop to b5. I see our chat saying a few ideas. D takes c. Some people want to play knight d5. So let's just take a look at a few of these. So knight d5 is similar to what we just saw, I think, in this example, right? It's actually the exact same setup. We just have a lot less pieces on the board. The difference here is knight d5, because black still has these resources, they can play a move like knight to d7 and defend, and black's going to hold on here. So knight d5 doesn't quite work yet. Bishop to b5 also looks like a fun move, but because of the pawn, they're going to be okay. They can hold on and just force us to move back, and then they have a little extra time to do whatever they want. So a few people suggested, yeah, d takes e5, and this is the right move, but here's the reason why. Is after black takes back, because if you don't take back, well, you're just losing the knight, right? It can't move, it's pinned, so you have to take. Queen takes queen, and now this has become an absolute pin. Now knight to d5, and importantly, if knight to d7, which was played in the game, this actually doesn't work because of another really good move. Yep, rook to d1 or castles both work. And the problem is now we have two pins about to be set up. We have one pin here and one pin here as soon as this knight moves. There's nothing you can do. In the game, king to e8 was sadly played, allowing knight takes here. And the reason that was played is that's actually, I think, the best move. If you play something like h6, right, to try and attack the bishop, then bishop takes, knight takes, and the knight's pinned. And I've just won this piece, right? You have a knight and a bishop, and I have two knights and a bishop. What else is there? If you play c6 to attack my knight, I'll just switch. I'll take here. And again, if you take, now I'm taking and forking the king and the rook. If you play something like h6 to be tricky now, I can play knight takes d7, check, take, and knight to b6, check, and I'm winning the rook anyway. This is a brutal position, and all of it came from e5. e5. I'll show you on the computer if you can see, plus 0.4, plus 7.2. One move, e5. It looks so natural. But because it is creating this pin, we're allowing white to trade in the center, force the king into the corner, and there's just too much pressure. You can't deal with all of the pins.
So this is the perp defense?
Yeah, so the Peert's defense starts here with e4, d6, usually. and we'll kind of rotate around this idea of black setting up the knight, the bishop, this pawn in this format. But it starts with this 1d6 move. Just really quickly, I'll show you how the game continued. The game ended in like 16 moves. But after king to e8, allowing the fork, king goes back, knight takes rook, h6 attacking the bishop, bishop to e3, b6, f3, bishop attacks the knight, and you can't save it, so knight takes pawn. Bishop takes, and you can't even take the bishop back because it's still pinned. So the king goes to e7, bishop back to e3, and in this position, black resigned. Against a FIDE master, down a piece, or a rook, or an exchange, it's just, this is enough. Okay, so now we have some good introduction to pins and the three principles, right? One, pins petrify pieces, right? The pinned pieces are petrified, they can't move. Second one, pinned pieces don't protect, right? So not only can they not move, that means that they don't have the influence they did before. And three, we want to put pressure on them. Because they can't move, they can't get away, pressuring the pinned pieces, adding attackers is really going to help us out. So we're going to jump into some practice examples. If you think you know it, feel free to shout out some suggestions. Some of these are going to be easier than others. We're going to start out a little simple. So in this position, it's white to move and play the only winning move. Totally even material. A piece for a piece, pawn for a pawn, king for a king. How should white gain the advantage here? Only winning move. It's a white move. Yeah, bishop g4. Again, pretty simple here. But the idea is the king is too far away to defend. Because the knight can't move, there's just nothing to be done. And up a bishop, we're going to be able to win this pawn and guide ours home. Similar idea here. Black to move, play the only winning move. Yeah, again, this is just to get a flow of it going, right? The king is too far away, and the knight can't move. So we're going to win this piece and be able to do a nice king and rook checkmate, which if you don't know, maybe another time I'll show you how to do that. Okay, third example. Technically, it's not the only move to win here, right? A queen and a king can beat a king and a rook, but it's one of the harder like piece versus piece checkmates. If we look at the computer, it's going to tell us it'll take like 30 moves of precise play. So instead of doing that, let's find a pin tactic. Anybody have an idea?
Queen to a7.
Yep, queen a7, super simple. There's lots of other ways to do it. You could try and get like a fork somewhere going. But yeah, queen a7 is just immediately shutting down any of white's hopes. And we're going to win with the queen and king. White to move again, play the only drawing move. So in this case, a pin isn't always, like, a tactic doesn't always mean we win. In this case, if we look at it, right, it's a rook and a bishop versus a rook and a knight. But black just has an extra piece. So we're down a piece here, but because of the pin, we can win. And a lot of people are throwing it out in the chat. Our move here, bishop to g6, pinning the knight. There's no way to defend it, and we're going to win it. Black to move and play the only winning move in this position.
Bishop to f.
Oh, sorry?
I was thinking bishop to f6.
Okay. Did you have a different idea?
No, it's same.
Same, yeah. Bishop f6, and this is the only move that does it. And it's funny, in this position, white would love to sacrifice their own pawn so their rook could come defend. But unfortunately, that is not a current rule in chess. So there's no way to survive this. You're either losing the knight for free or you're losing the rook. That's about as simple as it gets. Next example here, white to move and again play the only winning move.
Bishop ABC.
Good. Another quick one, right? We have a rook and a bishop. We're lining them up, and the queen and king, we hit them together. So these aren't, again, the most complicated ideas, but I want to build this habit in of seeing if pieces are lined up, we have a piece that can attack on multiple angles. A pin can just immediately take a position that's lost into one that wins. So being able to see these is super, super helpful. All right. White to move in this position.
D1.
Rook d1, yes. Rook d1. Okay. Let's say I play king f8.
Takes with the bishop, the bishop.
Okay, takes with the bishop. King e7.
Biggie,
Now you're pinned.
biggie back.
Yes, you are pinned, but we can defend the rook. So that's one maybe thing to be aware of with a pin, is if we're okay with a trade, if our pinned piece can move and defend, then, you know, so pins aren't perfect. We'll talk about that at the end. But, again, I love the alliteration.
In the previous move, if you go back on,
Yes.
why did you move the pawn before the king, the black pawn? Two steps.
Oh, so in this position, if we played f5 here, I will just take it.
Oh,
Because it's still pinned, right? You can't take me back, I will take your rook. Yes, so good question. But again, it looks like that would normally be a great move, but pin pieces don't protect. It's a shame. Skipped an example. Okay. White to move, and again, play the only winning move. And I will point out something very important in this position. If we move our queen somewhere too dramatic, this bishop and queen will checkmate us on g2. So we got to be a little careful. Also, our queen is not defended. So be aware of both of those facts.
the pin on bishop. The bishop can move to A, B, C.
Yeah, it's actually the same as, again, a few examples ago. I forget which one here. Yeah, this same idea, right? It's come back. It's the same pin. And amazingly, right? It's not, this piece wants to take our queen, but it can't. It's not defended. So it doesn't matter that we haven't defended our piece. We've removed the attacker. Pinned pieces are petrified. Yes. This is a really fun one. This is probably the hardest one we've looked at so far. White to move and play the best move. This is a little more complicated. One of my favorite pin examples, though. Queen to d5. Okay. What's your idea?
Queens are protected on d7.
That's the key. So a move like, so some people in this position will suggest queen to like a4 or b5, pinning the knight to the queen. And this looks good, but the problem is, after rook to c6, I've defended it. With queen to d5, now we have two threats, the bishop and the knight. And if you move the rook to defend one, I take the other one. Brutal. So because we are pinning both of these pieces, black doesn't have time to answer both threats. Questions on this one? It's a little more complicated, but it's a really cool one.
Is taking with the queen or the other supporting piece?
So the only, I'm not sure in this particular example, so let's say I go here. Probably this one, it's okay to take with the supporting piece. I get a little hesitant just because I don't want some kind of weird discovery to happen. So, like, again, this is going to be fine, but I'm just always going to be a little hesitant to let my queen hang. In that particular one, it doesn't matter. I can just take. But I'm always a little cautious, so I don't want to get counterpinned. So as long as you're aware of that, it shouldn't really matter. Okay. White to move, and again, play the only winning move. Yeah, simple and sweet. Rook f8. This knight now can't move anywhere, and this rook is going to be stuck. And actually, I think we might just be able to like straight up win one of these pieces. Our threat is immediately just bishop to f4, and I don't think there's a great way to stop it. Black to move and play the only winning move. And a little more complicated here.
Rook d3.
Yes. So funny enough, in this position, some people might not see it immediately, but this bishop is actually not defended. Right? It's not obvious to see, but pin pieces, remember, don't protect. So we want to be aware of the pins that are existing in the position, not just the ones that we create. And yeah, this is very unfortunate for our white player here. All right, last practice example, and then I'm going to show you a few other ideas. So white to move, play the only winning move.
b2.
Queen b2. Hitting the rook, and there's really nothing you can do here. You can try the tricky move, rook to c2 check, but we just take it. So we don't win the queen, but we do still win a rook regardless. And if, let's say, a non-move, let's say black just passes, what would you do here?
It would be rook to c1.
Yeah, we got to pile on the pinned piece, right? We're putting pressure on it. And now there's, really nothing. Same thing. You can try to be tricky, but it actually doesn't matter which way we take this, because if we take with the rook, we defend the queen. And if we take with the queen, we get out of harm's way. So either way is fine. And there's just nothing else black can do to defend this piece. Okay, questions about the basics of pinning or anything we've gone over so far before we move into a game? Everybody feel good? Excellent. So this is a really fun game. Paul Morphy was a player in the 1800s, one of the best of the time, and he is probably most famous for playing Morphy's Opera House game. A lot of people have seen that game. It's a great game. It uses pins, but I don't want to be so basic that I'm just going to show that game. So this is another Morphy game where he really, I think it's just 12 moves long. Yeah, 12 moves. And he wins with some incredible pinning maneuvers, and I want to show it to you. So this was played in 1857 in New York versus Alexander Meek with the black pieces. Morphy had white. He started with e4, e6, d4, and c5. So this is a little more unusual. Usually with e6, you'll see like a French defense with d5. c5 is a playable move, and now we've transposed into a kind of Sicilian defense. The main idea here is black would actually love for white to capture, so they can take back with the bishop and develop their piece, maybe play like queen to b6 and get an attack on f2. So that's kind of what black is going for here, but there's actually a bit of a problem, and Morphy exploits it. d5, taking some space, putting some pressure, and now we're actually saying this pawn is going to be a little weak and a little backwards. e5, another kind of unusual move, just kind of black accepting their fate with this pawn, but trying to really solidify on the d4 square, gain some control in the center. Still a little offbeat, but it's not losing. And f4, interesting move by Morphy. Earlier I said I didn't love f4 because it exposes us to queenside attacks. Here it's maybe okay because, g3 is going to defend, and it's going to be a little weird, but I still don't think getting the queen out this early is a huge problem. And now it's actually kind of the same as we saw before. Now white would love for black to take this piece because we can then develop our bishop. d6, defending, knight to f3, putting pressure in the center, and bishop to g4. So Meek creates a pin. Pawn takes pawn. Bishop takes knight. So this is a little in-between move. We now don't have time to complete the capture. We've got to save our queen. So queen takes, and pawn takes back. Everything is still even. Bishop to b5 check. This is a really nice move. Getting our last piece in the game, and also doing it in a way, normally this move is not as good because they're going to have a bishop they're happy to trade, or because a pawn can just push. But with c5 played and the bishop traded away, this is a great move. We're forcing the knight to pin itself. And in the game, knight to d7 was played. We also have the option now of castling and putting a lot of pressure on f7. That is not what Morphy decided to go for, I believe. He played knight to c3, just a simple development move, which is also fine. Knight to f6, and now bishop to g5. And we have a beautiful double pin setup. And there's a very similar idea if you've seen the Opera House, where both of these knights are on these exact same squares, pinned by these two bishops. And something really funny about this is because both knights are pinned, it looks like they should be defending each other, but they're actually not. Really, all these knights are doing is just taking up space and cramping black's position, because without these knights, black might be able to move the queen somewhere a little more valuable, but it's actually just keeping it too congested. So this is a really strong move. In this position, Meek plays bishop to e7, and I believe we are at move 10, so white plays two more moves, and then black resigns. If anyone would like to hazard a guess at what white should do here, feel free to throw out some ideas. How should white get...
Move the pawn, B8, D. Yes, push that.
Okay, so if I play d6, that's not defended, so I'm probably just going to take it.
Oh.
King side or queen side?
Inside.
Yeah, queen side. I like them both. Both rooks are going to be relevant, right? If we have a rook here with the queen lined up against the king, that's going to be nice. But also having this pawn, that might support your pawn push idea. Yes, both are half open files. Rooks love open files. So yeah, both of those would be great. Queen f5 being suggested. So queen f5 looks nice. We are putting more pressure on this knight. Although I think with queen f5, I think maybe just castles. And now we've broken out of the pin. So this knight is now, both knights are defending each other, right? So now we can't really try and win either knight because the other knight can come in. So queen f5 looks good, but I don't think it's quite fast enough. Both castles are good moves. They're just not crushing. I think they will still get the job done, but there's a really crushing move.
Bishop takes d7.
Okay, bishop takes d7. Again, this is a nice idea, but unfortunately because of bishop e7, the knights now are defending each other. So it's still gonna, like, black's still gonna survive this. We can do a big trade. We could castle and put pressure on f7, but I think black's gonna be okay. It's not an obvious looking move until you see why it's so good. I'll give you another minute or so and then I will help you out. So Joe Bruno STL also suggesting d6. So we looked at this, and the problem seems to be that it's not defended. The bishop is going to take.
Can you just take the knight with your bishop?
This one here. So if we... oh, sorry, wait. Bishop e7. So if we take... this knight can't move, but now the bishop is here to take back. Do you have a follow-up here?
I was thinking if the pawn.
Yeah, if pawn takes, that would be a little nicer. I think black still may be a little fortified, but the king is, like, a little more exposed with this weakness. But if bishop takes,
Yeah.
it's even better. So, all right. Any last guesses, or you want me to help you out?
If you play d6,
Yeah.
You could clear out that square for the knight to go to d5.
Okay, so you're thinking of sacking the pawn, bishop takes, knight to d5. Okay, so now we're getting somewhere interesting. We're noticing that d6 isn't just giving up a pawn, it is actually moving this, yeah, this bishop away. Yeah, Joe Bruno West, yeah, what you said. Yeah, so everybody said d6. And here's what's actually amazing. So d6 is the right move. Knight to d5, I think will probably be good enough. This looks great. Morphy played an even slightly better move. He just queenside castled. And now the bishop is undefended. If the bishop moves, the knight is hit by the bishop and the rook, so it's double pinned. This knight is still pinned. So what do? If you just play bishop e7, then I'm going to take your knight, and then I'm going to take this knight. And you probably don't want to give me your queen, so you can move, and now I have a beautiful discovered attack. Defending my bishop, hitting your king, and I'm going to play bishop to c4, and I'm going to threaten this pawn, and your position has just completely crumbled. I am up a piece. I'm very happy. So you can't just play bishop e7. If you try for some kind of counterattack like h6, this also doesn't work. Can anyone help me out with why this doesn't work?
Well, you're just trading bishops, right?
We could trade bishops, yeah. So this is essentially saying rook takes and then pawn takes.
Win a piece if you take the knight, or take the knight with the bishop first.
Yeah, so bishop takes and I can't move this knight, so I have to take... I guess I could take with the queen here. And yeah, regardless of how all the trading ends, this bishop is still hanging. So I have 2 pieces for your 1, and I'm also just putting a ton of pressure on it. So yeah, really good. So yeah, just taking is simple enough. You can also take this knight, is going to be fine as well, because after the queen takes, we're going to do a similar thing here. And we're going to fork the bishop and the rook. So amazingly, white is just winning in every variation. It's a beautiful position to be in when you can't play a losing move. But all of this comes from just these beautiful pins, right? It's such a simple position. And sure, in this position, I'm going to say, in this position, white's better, but I don't think it's crushing. But just some really simple moves. Bishop to b5. Bishop to g5. And these knights now are just so helpless. And it just undermines everything in the position. And there's no time. Bishop e7 is too slow. h6 in this position is also too slow. Because here, we can take, and you can't take with this knight, so we're intentionally removing this defender. Take, and we're going to do a similar thing. We're going to, instead of winning a bishop, we're hitting a pawn in the rook.
So when they move their queen to relieve the pin, that's when we capitalize and we have to trade our bishop, right?
Yeah, so the reason we're doing this first is because we don't want the queen to be able to take back here. We want to damage the pawn structure so that when our queen takes, we're hitting the rook and the pawn, and again, everything's falling. So you're going to save the rook. Don't actually know what's better here, but we're going to get check, and this is still going to be plenty good enough for white to win. We have 2 beautiful center pawns. We're going to be able to castle either way, and our rooks are going to be really good either way. So, yeah, there was just really nothing that could be done in this position. It's just already 2 lost because you didn't deal with either of these pins. So really fun game. Again, 12 moves, Morphy versus Meek. Great game to look at for just examples of pins. We got a little bit more time. I want to do a little bit of a cautionary tale. As I mentioned a little before, pins aren't perfect. So I want to give a few quick examples and things to watch out for when you're looking for pins in your games. So let's just look at a possible opening here again. e4, c5, Sicilian, d4, and c3. And this is a Smith-Morra gambit, if anyone's seen this or maybe anyone plays this. It's kind of a hyper-aggressive way for white. You're giving up 2 pawns, but you're getting some rapid activity, right? A knight and a pawn come out. And this is maybe slightly better for black with good play, but white gets a lot of advantages, a lot of development. So nothing wrong at a early level playing like this. So like knight to c6, we're just going to play some normal moves, getting our pieces in the center. And black here plays bishop to g4, pinning our knight to the queen. And this is actually a mistake. This looks like a really solid normal move, developing our piece. Maybe we want a queenside castle, though it's probably unlikely, but, we're just creating a pin. What's the problem here? What should white respond with?
And the knight with bishop on c4.
Here? We could. Yeah, bishop e5, that would be an option, although I don't know that that's going to be kind of a crushing win for us. Like, black's, at very worst, black can just retreat, and then we both moved our bishop twice, and black's in a fine position. Yeah, there are a few people who I think have it in the chat. There's kind of 2 ideas, but both of them revolve around the fact that this bishop is not defended. And a poor pin is really just a discovery waiting to happen. Bishop takes f7. And after the king takes, check. We're winning our bishop back. and your king can't move. So because this piece wasn't defended, it looks like this is a great pin, but really it was an opportunity for us to move our knight and win a piece. So you do have to be a little bit careful of that. Someone else in the chat suggested knight e5, which is kind of brutal, with the idea that, oh, you can take my queen and then I can get checkmate. That's pretty funny. I don't know if that 100% works, because I think knight takes e5 defends the bishop, and that's going to cause a little bit of problems. But it is a cute idea. Maybe knight g5 a little better. Well, I still don't want to give up my queen. Probably I just need to take. So, yeah, the idea is we've drawn the king away, and we're going to get a discovery. So you always want to be a little careful that whatever piece you're pinning really can't move, right? Because in this case, I don't want to lose my queen, but it's a relative pin. I definitely don't want black to lose the king.
Is queen b3 also a valid tactic?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Queen b3 is also a good move in this position. This is actually a fork, right? So we're preparing to take on f7, but we're also hitting this b7 pawn. This is, I think, the second best move in the position. It's still a good advantage for white. So that's a good one to be aware of too. But yeah, either of those are going to be winning ideas. All right, next example. This is one that comes out of a really common opening, the Philidor defense. e4, e5, knight to f3, and d6. The idea here is we're not committing our knight to c6 yet for black, and we're actually opening up space for our bishop to come out, so bishop to g4 is a common idea in this Philidor. It's maybe a little bit passive, right? We're not putting a lot of pressure on the center like a normal knight to c6 would, but not a bad move. d4 and bishop to g4. This is common theory. And after d takes e5, black actually has to be a little bit careful. Because if pawn takes the pawn back, black is actually in trouble. If pawn takes pawn, what's the problem? Yeah, we've removed the piece that was pinned. Right, or sorry, we removed the target of the pin. So the knight now is just happy to take this pawn. We just win a pawn for free. So that's something else you have to be careful of. This idea is called an intermezzo, which is, I think, an Italian word, but it just means it's an in-between type of move. So normally we wouldn't be able to recapture this, but because we have this in-between move where we're forcing you to respond in a very certain way, we get rid of the piece that is causing this pin, and now our knight is free to move. So for any Philidor defense players, the correct move in this position is to take the knight. And after the queen takes, you win the pawn back and it's all even. So again, something to be a little aware of there as well. A few others. Somebody's asking, can we show us if king d7, but I'm not sure exactly what variation you're talking about. So if you say what variation you want me to look at, I will help you out. Here's another fun one, also kind of hard to see, but this is called the elephant trap, and it's another thing that I really like to play. d4, and this is for black, d5. c4, we have a queen's gambit. Really common idea, if you're not familiar, is if black takes this pawn and accepts the gambit, white is almost always going to win it back by moving their e-pawn, and then the bishop will take it back. And it's usually not worth the hassle for black to try and hang on to that pawn, so it's just a trade. Okay, we'll take a look at that MHM as soon as we finish this one. So e6, knight to c3, knight to f6, and bishop to g5. Again, we have a pin here, relative pin. And in this position, there's lots of ways for black to respond, right? The idea is they're putting pressure on our knight and putting pressure on the center. Some people will play bishop to e7 here, unpinning. Some people will play c6 here, defending. There's lots of moves you can play. One move that you don't see all the time, but is kind of a tricky move, is this knight to d7. And this looks like a blunder. It looks like a blunder because after pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, now the knight can take because our knight's pinned, and this knight is not only not helped this knight, but it's also blocked our queen from defending. So this just looks like a horrible move that a new player would just play without thinking. The problem is, this is exactly what black wants. It's black to move in this position and find a killer move.
queen. That.
Sorry? Yeah, knight takes d5, giving up the queen. And now? Absolutely brutal. The king is almost mated, and there's only one way to not get mated, to give the queen right back. And when all the dust settles, the only thing that happened that was not an equal exchange is we got to take a knight for a pawn. We have 3 pieces, and they have 2. And they have 1 extra pawn. So it's a really funny trap. And again, you can see exactly what happens is this knight takes this pawn, and we take that knight. Everything else is dead even. So again, you got to be a little careful. Some people are kind of crafty and know that beginners like pins. Pins are still always great, and I love recommending them. But you do have to be aware there are some ways to exploit them. Yeah, this is a fun trap in the Queen's Gambit declined called the Elephant trap. Okay, so real quick, I want to go back and see, help our friend here with what this puzzle was. Puzzles, when I played Bishop takes f7. So that was here. So here in our Smith Mora, I did Bishop takes f7, and you were suggesting something else. Bishop f7, king d7. Oh, I see. Yeah, so you're just saying if bishop f7, king d7. I mean, that's fine. You can play king d7. I'm just going to move my bishop back. And yeah, my piece is still pinned, but I won a pawn for nothing, and your king is now on d7. So I'm happy with this. In some strange worlds, there's maybe a variation where eventually I play knight to e5 because this pawn is pinned now. And I fork. I can't do that because of this knight right now, but, you know, maybe there's a world where that happens. But, yeah, king d7, not a big problem. Okay, a couple more. I want to show you 2 more examples of cautionary tales against pins. I still really advocate them. They're super, super great, but you got to be aware. And then we'll look at 3 final kind of practice examples that are a little more advanced. So this is a common one called Legal's Mate. There's lots of ways to reach this position, but here's the most common. We create the pin, h3 to push the bishop back, and now white to move, and if you've seen it, you already know how brutal it is. White to move and play absolutely crushing move. Yeah, again, knight takes e5. It's the same idea. We're sacking, and now the idea is if bishop takes queen, how do we win? King has 1 square. Checkmate. Absolutely gross. Just brutal. This king has no moves. Every square is covered. So, okay, but there's 2 other options, right? We don't have to take the queen. What if they just do something like the bishop back? Well, we just want a pawn, so we're doing fine. We can take the bishop and weaken the pawns more. We can take the knight and make double pawns here. We got lots of options, but we're fine just winning a pawn. If you try and hold on to everything, if you take the knight, for instance, let's say you take it with the pawn, well, now, like we just saw, any bad pin is just a discovery. So I just take the bishop. And again, I won a pawn, and I traded a knight for a bishop. And if I take with the knight, I'll do the same thing here. And you might say, wait a minute, but your bishop's free too. How would white respond here? Queen b5. Forking the king and the knight. So we're going to win it back either way again. And we just won a pawn in these variations, but it's a center pawn, so it's a crucial one. And we did it with kind of a pretty stylish move. Right, knight takes e5, and most people are just going to think you're a dummy and take your queen. So this probably won't happen, but it's still good to know, that white's ahead no matter what they play. One final. This is called Legal's Mate, or Legal's Trap if they don't take the bait and get checkmated. But it's a good one to know. This pattern of knight, bishop, and this knight's going to come in, and all of the squares are going to be covered. So it's a valuable one to know. One final game here. This is a super, super fun game. It's called the Skewer Lure. And we have e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6. We have an Italian game, and d4, so a little aggressive in the center. And we saw a similar idea with the Scotch gambit we were looking at earlier where we sack a pawn. In this case, they don't take. If you recall, had they taken here, then white is happy after rook to e1, d5, and we get this really nice double pin where we're winning the piece back. So it's just some familiarity with the position. But in this case, they decided not to take the pawn and played bishop to e7. Knight takes d4, regaining that pawn, and knight takes, queen takes. d6, f4, maybe preparing e5. b6, looking to give a bishop a home maybe here, put some pressure on the king. And e5, like we said, f4 helping to support in the center. Pawn is pushed, and now there's a bit of a threat that we need to be careful of. So what would happen if I just played my bishop back to like e2, say? What would black play? I'll just do it.
Move the knight.
They might, or they might play bishop c5, pinning our queen to the king. So we have to be a little aware of what's going on in the position, right? We're threatening a knight, and they're threatening a queen. So in the game, the move played was bishop to b5 check, right? Saving our bishop and stalling with the move. And there's no way to play c6 here because it's not defended. So bishop to d7. And white plays pawn takes the knight. And what did we just see? Yeah, bishop c5 pinning. But what if I told you that white actually saw this variation and decided to keep calculating? White actually has a really killer idea. Check. Okay, well, here I can't move the bishop because it's pinned. If I move this bishop, then I've lost my threat on your queen, and I'm just going to take it for free. And if I move the queen, then the same thing. I'm just going to lose a queen. So what's the point of me doing this? It's only move. King to f8. Pawn takes pawn, forking the king and the rook. With the rook cutting us off, we have one move. Checkmate. With a pinned queen. Now, pinned pieces do not protect. This is a rule that applies in every circumstance except when a king is attacking, because a king can never move into check. The way I would think about it, it's a little confusing sometimes, is think about, you would say, wait, but this queen can't move because then I would take your king. But which king dies first? You take the queen, I take your king first, and then you take mine. So whoever's king goes first, that you can't do it. It doesn't work. So really fun game here. We got just like 2-3 minutes left, so I want to show you 3 more examples. These are a little more advanced, but let's see what you can do. White to move and play the only winning move. So rook takes f5. Your queen is not defended. I will take it. I will win a queen.
So we are rook to this way. Oh, the queen's still not.
Okay, rook d1. Your queen is still not defended. But the back rank.
Oh, yes.
Brutal. This is checkmate. And, even worse, you can't take the rook because I'm pinning you. So it's a double pin. You can't move your queen off here or I take the rook. And you can't move your queen down here or I take the king. Really brutal. In this case, I don't even think there's a good move. You're just losing your queen. That's rough. White to move. And in this position, we are down. We have 2 rooks versus 2 rooks. 2 knights and a bishop versus 1 knight and a bishop. So we're down a piece. But it is white to move and play the only move that draws. Chesteroid, you have the right idea. The c-pawn marches forward, c4. This knight now has to move, and our rook is going to pin their bishop to the king. So after the knight goes anywhere, the march is on. You cannot take my pawn because you are pinned. Really brutal. We're winning the piece back. And yes, it draws amazingly. Last example. White to move, and again, play the only move that draws. If you are in a game and you are losing, don't give up. You can still draw if you find the right tactic.
Bishop takes e5.
Okay, bishop takes e5. Yes, so I can't take back with the pawn or else I lose my queen, so I will take back with the queen.
And
Queen takes queen.
Okay, now I take back with the pawn. Okay, I take back with the pawn. Good. Good. The rook is still there. And we win our piece back. You have to do that in a very precise order, right? Any other move doesn't work, because if we take the bishop first, then you can just take with the queen. And if you take, I don't know, if you do something like this, it still doesn't work. I can still just take with the queen. You have to be very precise with that. So really, really good. Well, that is all the time we have tonight. But thank you all for joining me, both in person and on the stream. It's been a pleasure. My name's Alex Moellering, and I hope to see you again next